KGO 810. Live from the Conklin Brothers studio. Conklin Brothers floor covering in San Jose, Fremont, and San Mateo.
Good Saturday afternoon. Matt Ray, KGO Radio 810. 415-808-0810 is the number, 808810. You can also chime in on Twitter at Matt Ray Talk. Well, it's beginning this weekend. Major U.S. airports, international airports have stepped up screening to keep Ebola out of the country. Do you think it's enough just to check for fevers and ask a few questions? It wouldn't have caught the guy in Dallas, by the way, because he wasn't showing any symptoms. And according to Liberia, he lied on his questionnaire when he took off. 415-808-0810 is the number. Do you think it's enough to keep Ebola out of the U.S.? Ken Jenkins is an aviation crisis consultant. We've talked to him several times here on KGO. I usually turn to him when there is news involving not only crises around the world, but having to do with airlines, that kind of thing. Ken, good morning, or good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here on KGO.
Hi, Matt. Nice to talk with you again.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. First, let's talk about what the airports are doing, and not only in West Africa, but here at home.
Well, in West Africa and other countries, they're doing performing exit screening, temperature being taken, questions about their health, looking for visual signs of potential illness. Pretty much what's happening on entry into the United States, beginning at John F. Kennedy Airport today.
And is this enough? Is this kind of just a PR stunt, I guess, on behalf of the government? I mean, it wouldn't have caught the guy in Dallas, would it?
No, from what the information that we had, and I think you summed it up well in the introduction, was the reports that we have now is that Mr. Duncan did not truthfully answer his exit questionnaire when he left Liberia, and because he was asymptomatic when he arrived into the country and then into Dallas, it wouldn't have caught him. If he had said yes, he had been in Liberia, there were additional questions, they may have pulled him back, but we'll never know at this point. I think it's also important to know that it's not just the CDC that's performing these tests, if you will, on or examining folks as they come in. Airlines also have screening procedures, frontline employees, and then flight attendants and pilots as well. There's a lot of information in the manuals that flight attendants can carry with regards to illness and symptoms. And if they're suspicious, they take that information to the cockpit, which then the cockpit will reach out to the medical department of the airline and then make a determination if public health officials and or the CDC need to meet the arriving aircraft.
What happens if one gets through? I mean, you had the guy on the plane here earlier this week, the idiot that said, hey, you're all screwed. I was in Africa and I have Ebola. Thank God the jerk was joking. But what's the protocol there if one gets through and they're midair and they find out one slipped through?
Well, and that's going to be the issue is what happens if one gets through. I mean, in the 5 airports that are being set up for the CDC to do this exit screening, Matt, what they're looking for are the countries like, for example, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. For passengers that are coming from those countries into the United States, they're filling out not only questionnaires, but also where they're going to be traveling within the U.S. So if something happens, they can follow up with these folks and know where they are. And from an airline perspective, today it's similar to if somebody has tuberculosis, or we find out after a flight somebody has tuberculosis. The airline is able to determine, of course, the flight that the person was on and then get in contact with the passengers that were on that flight so that they can go be checked out. The difference in this particular case, I think, is we're only looking at a few airports, and the symptoms are so they're almost normalizing until you have symptoms, if you will. I mean, you look great until you have a symptom. So at that point, you could be days away from wherever you came in, and then, the epidemic could begin.
The White House has said that the 5 major U.S. airports that are doing the screening, they will catch, they're the airports that receive the majority of flights from those areas that have been stricken with the Ebola virus. But what about somebody who flies to Europe and then hops on a plane in Europe and flies over to the U.S.? What about that? Do we have the ability to track that?
Well, at this point, I think the short answer to that is no. What you find is that anybody coming into the United States, they fill out their immigration forms, do not have to put on there, I believe, where they're going to be staying. And if they do, there's no way of knowing if that's a valid address or not once they enter into the country. However, similar to the frontline employees, the CBP or Customs and Border Patrol, those folks are also trained in looking for infectious disease and symptoms of illness. And even though those outside of those 5 airports, those folks in the other airports aren't screening, they're still observing. It's more of a passive screening, if you will. And they still have the ability to stop someone and inquire, where have you come in from? We'd like to take your temperature, pull over here. They can pull the paramedics in. They always have that ability. They do that today already.
Sure. Well, I don't have a lot of faith, Ken. I'm sorry if I'm
Well, I can see where one wouldn't. At the same time, there are a lot of layers, but the problem is this whole process, Matt, and as you know, the process is based on human beings. Sure. And wherever the human beings are in charge of the process, human error is going to come in. And that's the case in this particular instance. We're relying on passengers to tell the truth. We're also relying on CBP and other agencies to make sure that they're performing at the top of their game.
Sure. I just see people getting Ebola, and why would you not come to the U.S. to get treated?
Certainly to see, you would want to seek good medical attention, but and looking at recent information from the CDC, the 8,000 cases plus, of course, are in the countries of Guinea and Liberia and Sierra Leone. There's only been 1 case in the United States, 1 in Spain, and 1 in Senegal. So it hasn't been transmitted in high numbers outside of those impacted countries, and they're doing what they can now to limit that exposure in those countries. Nigeria has been quite successful in virtually eliminating Ebola from their country, and now we just have to work hard to see what we can do in Africa.
What's the ramifications of just stopping flights, incoming flights from those countries?
Well, of course, there's the loss of, of course, you look at the economy and the economic impact, but those flights also carry humanitarian aid as well. You're looking at transporting doctors and nurses and technicians along with any type of medical care that's going. So that's certainly something to look at. There are plans within the CDC and the Department of Transportation that started many, many years ago and then were brought more up to date. You may remember when pandemic flu was kind of the big topic back in 2004, 2005. And it was narrowed down to about 17 or 18 ports of call within the United States that transportation would be shut down if an epidemic or pandemic took place. And I think you would see the same thing here. But I don't think anybody's looking at that right now because the transmission rate is so small by air at this point that I don't think we're going to see that as a possibility right now.
All right. KGO News Time is 12:15. Can I get you to hold on to the breaks? I have a few more questions about the screening and where we go from here. Okay. 808810. Our guest is Ken Jenkins, Aviation Crisis Consultant. The website is kenjenkinsllc.com. Ken, when we were talking about these major U.S. airports and the number of people that come through these airports from the Ebola-stricken countries, the White House said the majority of them do, but are there other airports that they fly into?
I don't know specifically, Matt, from those countries if there are nonstop flights off the top of my head. Where my concerns would be out of those countries like Sierra Leone, for example, or others, where they fly to another point in Europe, and then somebody gets on a flight, let's say like Mr. Duncan did. He flew to Brussels and then flew from Brussels into the United States from his port of entry and then from that city into Dallas-Fort Worth. With technology the way that it is now, Customs and Border Patrol from most ports can see where you've entered a country and exited a country. So it would become more difficult to say, no, I wasn't in Liberia, unless you traveled to a country that didn't have that automation and your passport wasn't tracked.
Earlier this week, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie held a news conference. Obviously, they're going to start these screenings at Newark International, unless they haven't already. He said he was concerned, but he was assured by the White House that everything would go as smooth as possible and be taken care of. And this is being run by the federal government. Is this something that they should probably be cooperating with authorities on the state level?
Well, and I'm I don't want to answer for the state of New Jersey, but I think you'll see that already, and that most airports, even if they're privately run, work in conjunction with their local government and state government because of the fact that they are an airport doing interstate and global commerce, if you will. So I think you already see that. I think the best way to say this, and this is probably not going to make anybody feel better, but as somebody just said in an interview that I saw in the news is, we're not going to be able to reduce the risk to zero. All we can do is through the multi-layered approach is reduce the risk. Sure. And so those 5 airports are the key airports where most of the flights coming in, 94% of them are coming into those cities, and the folks coming in from those countries impacted are being screened. And they're being screened at the exit point and the entry point, which is a really good start because that wasn't being done in the past. And what we can hope is that with the efforts going on in Africa and the screening going on here in the U.S., that this will stop or at least slow down the spread of Ebola.
Is there a concern or a plan for false alarms? I mean, I've had a cold this entire past week. Somebody gets on a flight and says, well, no, I haven't been to any of these countries, but I do have a fever.
Right. Well, and there you go. I was going to ask if you had a fever.
Yeah.
Well, we saw what happened with the gentleman that said he had Ebola, and then of course we also saw the film of the full hazmat team coming on board to remove him off the plane. This is again where we were talking about before the break, human beings being who they are. I don't think anybody on that plane thought that was a very funny comment. I'm sure he didn't either after hazmat took him off the aircraft. But if you think back to the anthrax days when white powder was being sent in the mail, there were airline flights that were just being rerouted and diverted because of a powdery substance being found on board the plane. And in most cases it turned out to be baby powder from a passenger that was had a baby on board, or it was spilt sweet and low or something like that. And I'm also the abundance of caution, but I am concerned that the airlines are going to get hit hard with this, with people that are sick. There was a flight to Midland, Odessa on American Eagle a few days ago, and the person was getting sick, and they didn't have a fever, but the passenger started talking about Ebola, and when the paramedics came, they took care of it accordingly, following the hazmat protocols, and it turned out the person, of course, didn't have Ebola, and it was a false alarm. I think we're going to see more of those as this continues on.
Yeah. Ken Jenkins, Aviation Crisis Consultant. The website is kenjenkinsllc.com. Ken, we appreciate your time as always. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Nice talking with you.